Hello everyone, it's Diane and welcome to Stamping with me. I've decided today to focus on doing another spring card. So this is the stamp set that we're going to work with. It's called Free as a Bird. I just love these little birds, and some of the greetings on the stamp set are really so versatile and beautiful. In addition to that stamp set, I'll be using the Subtle Dynamic Textured Impressions embossing folder, and we'll be using that to emboss one of our sheets of paper. And I'm going to be using the stitched nested label dies to actually cut out both my stamped image and my greeting. So let's get down to the paper materials that you'll need for this. You're going to need a piece of A4 card that's been cut in half. So if I lie it that way, you can see that that's half of an A4 card. It's been cut at 14.8 centimeters, and that length is 21 centimeters. Then it's been scored in half at 10.5 centimeters. I've got another piece of white card, which is the one I'm going to stamp my image and my greeting onto. And this is just another 14.8 by 10.5 centimeter piece of white paper. I'm using Blushing Bride, and this has been embossed. If I lift that higher, hopefully you can see that. This is what I mean about that subtle effect, having embossed it with that textured embossing folder. And this length of card is 14.5 centimeters by 10 centimeters. I'm using Petal Pink as a contrasting pink, and this is cut at 14.5 by 5.5 centimeters. And my designer paper comes from the beautiful set of Bird Ballad Designer Series paper. This is cut at 14.5 by 5 centimeters. So just to quickly give you a glimpse at some of these designer series papers that come in this Bird Ballad pack, aren't these lush? And the fantastic thing I love about the Stampin' Up papers is that there are two sides to them. So as in the case with this one, if you reverse it, you've actually got different images on it. But for today's make, we're going to be focused on using this side. And quite simply, those are the only pieces of cardstock that you need. So first thing I'm going to do is move that aside, and I'm going to use my smaller piece of white cardstock, and I'm going to use out of this set that large image of the 4 birds on a branch. You might have, if you tuned into one of my other videos, heard me say that the way I like to ink up my stamp sets is if it's a large surface that I'm covering, I usually like applying ink to the stamp. That way I can both see what I've already covered in ink, and I don't smudge around the edges of my block. That's ready for stamping. One of the other things in terms of a basic stamping technique, if you've not stamped before, is that I apply the block with the stamp down on the paper. I hold it firmly in place with one hand while I use a finger or a couple of fingers on the other hand just to apply slight pressure and make sure that I've stamped out the image. The greeting that I've decided to use is this one. Your friendship means the world to me. I've just realized that I don't send my friends nearly enough reminders of just how much I value their friendship and how much it means to have them in my life. So if I apply this to, say, the bottom section there, I know that I'm now going to be able to cut around the perimeter of those using my framelits, and I'll actually be able to do it for both of them. So what I'm going to do is quickly run these through the Big Shot. And what I like doing when I'm actually cutting anything out, even though I have a magnetic plate underneath on my Big Shot, is I use a piece of washi tape just to make sure that I'm holding that in place without it actually moving. So there we go. Let's just quickly run that through the Big Shot. You'll also notice just how well used my cutting plates are. I've said that before as well. These guys just keep going on and on. So if you have a look at that now, can you see the stitching all around the edges of that? I love the effect that that creates. So that's our one image. Now I want to cut out the greeting. And I can already see what I've done before I've even attempted to cut it out. I've not allowed nearly enough space to fit that on. But you know what? That's the fantastic thing about crafting, because all I can do now is flip that over. Let's just move that for a second. And I can actually stamp on the reverse of the paper. Let's just do that. There we go. And I've now allowed myself sufficient space to actually fit my framelit on. So I say this time and time again, there are no mistakes in crafting. And you know what? If they are mistakes that only you know about anyway, they are salvageable. So if we just quickly cut out our label, there we are. We can get the heavy machinery out of the way. I always call my Big Shot heavy machinery because it really does such a sterling job, and it's fantastic how quickly it can actually cut things out. Right, move those plates out of the way. So we've now got our stamped images, we've got our greeting, and we've got the pieces of card that we're going to use to assemble this card. The last thing I'm going to introduce is I'm using petal pink rose colored ribbon. This is an organza ribbon. Isn't that just beautiful? We don't need much of that, and you'll see what I'm going to use that for in a moment. So now it's about assembling the card. So let's just get our base card assembled. I like using a bone folder because it gives me a nice crisp edge. And then I'm going to use a liquid glue to, whoops, if your liquid glue is a little bit stubborn and coming out, just give it a little bit of a shake, and pretty soon it's flowing again. You don't need much. You can see how little I've actually applied around the edges of that. I saw that I had a smudge there just now from my finger, and I can cover that up with paper. So fantastic thing about multi-purpose glue, it's flexible and it gives you the ability to move your paper around if you find that it's slightly skew when you've applied it the first time. So stick down the embossed piece. Then the next thing I'm going to add is the petal pink, and I'm going to place that strip quite near the top edge, leaving probably about 1/2 centimeter to 1 centimeter gap. And then I'm going to apply my designer paper. I can already hear some of you saying, oh no, how can you be gluing on that side? Well, sometimes you have to. But there's still another huge piece left, so I'll be able to make another card and I'll be able to use the other side. That's the beauty about it being double-sided. Right, that's the base card assembled. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put some colour into my stamped image using some blends pens. If you've not worked with alcohol markers before, you're going to see something that I want to describe once I've done a little bit of colouring in. And you know what? Colouring in is brilliantly therapeutic. That's why I always say crafting is mindfulness in a box. Whenever I've been feeling stressed, I just find that being able to escape into my crafting space is fantastic. It just gives me an ability to have something really creative to focus on, and it really also just always lifts my spirit. Little guys have all got yellow beaks, or little ladies, shall we say. Let's put a bit of colour into this branch. You'll notice when I coloured in the blue flowers that I wasn't very precise about actually colouring them in, and that's because I'm very deliberately making this something that looks a little more artistic. It doesn't have to be pristine. Some of you prefer always, you know, being well within the lines. That's also fine. In fact, you've noticed I've used a broad brush tip there, but actually with my blends I prefer using the finer tip because I feel that just gives me a little bit of control. And I know you're looking at my horribly dirty fingers and you're probably thinking, oh my word. Well, I've been gardening this afternoon. Just been trying to get rid of some horrendous weeds that have been choking my roses. And because I have very little time to get into the garden at the moment, I decided it was a good opportunity just to go and lift some weeds. Disadvantage, of course, I was in a hurry and I didn't even bother to go and find my gardening gloves. So, end result, muddied fingers. Right, now I used a light granny apple to colour the leaves. I'm now using dark granny apple green just to lift some of the veins and add a little bit more depth to each of these leaves. And there we are. And because it's artistic license here, and I'm allowed, because it's my card that I'm making, I'm going to have a pink bird. And I'm using a light petal pink stamping blend pen. So I just want to fluff these little guys up a bit and give them a bit of colour, which I think gives them a little bit of character. So I know that by using this pink, because all the Stampin' Up products match so well, it means that this colour will blend with the designer paper and the cardstock that I've used. I used to use so many different crafting products, and eventually I settled on these because I find that everything matches and I don't have to run around scratching my head trying to figure out where I'm going to find a piece of ribbon to match it. And there we go. Let's just add a little bit of blue into these little chests here. And again, you can see I'm not colouring precisely. I'm just doing more of a squiggle than anything else. That's because feathers are normally fluffy anyway. Right, so my little birds are all coloured. Now, I want to keep that image quite flat against the card. So I'm going to stick this on with multi-purpose glue. And before I stick it on, remember I said I was going to tell you something about the alcohol pens? Can you see the marks that have come through on that paper? That's because it's an alcohol-based ink. So if you're colouring in something like this using an alcohol pen, remember to put it on a work surface, not on your actual card, because there is the risk that you might actually find that ink bleeding in. Right, and I'm going to position them just about there. Excellent. So the last thing now is to add my greeting and my ribbon. Now, some of you, I'm sure, remember, that was the mistake we made. Wasn't a mistake in the end because we've managed to salvage it. And that's often what I do while I craft. I find I do something and you know what, I end up with a smudge or something that I really don't want. And so I just end up covering it up with something else. Now, some of you might say, goodness, you've been very generous with those stamping dimensionals. If you're wondering what these little foam pads are that I've used, they are stamping dimensionals and they sticky both sides. reason I've done that is because I'm going to use this to stick my ribbon. So I don't need too much of that. Probably need a piece about as large as this, and I'm just cutting it on the diagonal. And then what I'm going to do is make sure I've got this the right way up before I then stick my ribbon down. So what I'm doing is I'm just catching the edges of the ribbon on some of those dimensionals, and then it gives me an opportunity to lift the rest of the paper strips so that I'm exposing the sticky sides that I want to use. And now my ribbon's in position and I can apply my ribbon to the card. There we go. All done. So that didn't take long at all. I hope you've enjoyed that. I hope that you're going to be looking to come and craft with me again. I will be doing crafting sessions like this on a regular basis. And don't forget, if you do want to go and see more of what I'm doing, that's where you will find me. Bye for now.